Allison Wiese. I'm originally from Brooklyn, where I was born and raised. Well, it's hard because I think almost as long, I'll say it this way, almost as long as I've known there were artists, I've wanted to be one. In retrospect, what I thought being an artist was and what being one is are quite different. I think when I was in second grade, around maybe 7 years old, I thought it would be really cool to get paid to draw because I really loved to draw. And later, when I was about 13, 14, I probably thought it would be great to be part of a movement and have eccentric friends and maybe become famous. In retrospect, none of these has much to do with what I do or even what I consider to be art now, and I like my job a lot better than either of those things. I don't sell my drawings very often, although I sometimes do. I'm certainly not part of a movement. I do have some eccentric friends, but I think making meaning, which is what I really consider my job to be, is much more interesting than any of those things. All sorts of things, a lot of everyday things. I've worked a lot with agricultural commodities, so using piles of oranges to create dystopic cornucopias. I trucked a ton of oranges from California to Texas, where they rotted for a month in a gallery in Houston, and that really came out of looking at actual piles of oranges along the highway in California. I've used livestock in my work. I tend to use common materials. Those are really one of the things that inspires me. I use a lot of what seem to be almost stereotypical pieces of Americana, images and texts that I'm interested in dragging forward through time and redeploying to see how well they function, to measure the difference between the way a progressive slogan worked in 1930 and whether it functions at all or how in 2009. I make sculptures, I make sound-based projects, and what I would deem architectural interventions. I would very likely, realistically, be a librarian or a farmer. If talent and stage fright were no barrier, I would be a musician. I've known it for years and very much admired the extent to which artists have been integrated into it, that it does not show canned exhibits that tour, that it challenges both adults and children. It's an environmental expansion of the old Fisher-Price Farmer Says toy, where you point the arrow to a different animal's picture and pull a lever and it recreates that sound. It's expanded that activity through an entire room, such that a bank of light switches at toddler height now will activate both all the traditional sounds, or most of them, from that toy, but also a slew of other things like a disco ball and a spotlight and dance music. So it's about several things. I mean, one, it's about providing access to something that's typically verboten to children, which is unlimited light switching. They love to switch lights, but they have to be either hoisted or reach them by chairs. Another was the idea that there's a funny misconnect between the extent to which our toys are still very, very commonly themed around agrarian culture, despite the increasing difference most of us experience between where animals are raised and where we live. So the fact that many children actually learn animal sounds before words. My daughter still only makes animal sounds. She doesn't speak English, and yet her experiences with animals have been fairly limited, and yet this is a tradition. So I was kind of curious about that. I was also interested in the idea of barn dances. They are an improvisational solution to living in a society that doesn't have an infrastructure that involves like dance halls and bars and music venues. They're essentially repurposing a barn and just saying, hey, it's got a big floor, we can throw a dance here. And I kind of like the idea that that was something that toddlers are really good at, this sort of improvising, and that adults forget about. So I thought that was a little funny. And then most of all, I had a really great experience at in a 2 to 3 year old classroom with a disco party being thrown in a child care center that made me realize that that was something sort of worthy of creating the opportunity for. You know, toddlers are gonna, I hope, engage with this bank of light switches and have, you know, not just the opportunity to turn the room lights on and off, but to control and test all sorts of activities that way. I think beyond that, younger children will be able to recognize some animal imagery. I think that they may be able to hopefully have some sort of spontaneous dance parties that they're very much in control of. As far as adults, I think that some of the things I would hope, or even older children, would be maybe that it would raise questions about who lives where and who gets what. I think it's really funny that, you know, barns can be repurposed into dance spaces for humans, but nobody ever gives animals wallpaper.